farmer lived alone for years, until he bought the last Apache woman left behind. The farmer had lived alone for so many years that he could barely remember a time when he had shared his life with anyone else. His house, a small wooden cabin on the edge of a vast plain, seemed to echo with the silence of his solitude. Every morning, the sun rose over the wide fields, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink, and he would wake before dawn, as he had done for decades. He liked the quiet, the rhythm of his life, and the work that kept him busy. Yet there was always a small, lingering emptiness in his heart, a feeling he could not quite name. He had inherited the farm from his father, who had built it with his own hands many years ago. The land was rich and fertile, stretching as far as the eye could see, with rows of crops that swayed gently in the wind and orchards heavy with fruit. Animals wandered around the barn, their morning calls filling the air. The lowing of cows, the clucking of chickens, and the occasional braying of a donkey. These sounds were comforting, but they were not enough to fill the human loneliness that settled over him every evening as the sun sank behind the distant hills. The farmer was a strong man, physically and mentally. Years of working the land had made his hands rough and calloused, but they were skilled hands, able to repair fences, plow fields, and mend broken tools. He knew every inch of his farm, every hidden path in the orchard, and every tree that bore the sweetest fruit. The routine of life on the farm gave him purpose. He woke with the dawn, fed the animals, worked the soil, and rested only when the work was done. And yet, in the quiet moments after dusk, when he sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky, he would feel the weight of years without companionship pressing on him. He remembered the early years of the farm, when the land was wild and untamed. He had spent countless days clearing stones, planting seeds, and learning the rhythm of nature. The work was hard, but it had taught him patience and resilience. He had friends in the nearby town, and there had been neighbors who would visit and share a meal or a story, but most of them had moved on, leaving the farmer to his solitary life. Sometimes he wondered if he had chosen this life of isolation, or if it had chosen him. Perhaps it was a little of both. Despite the loneliness, the farmer had found ways to fill his days. He kept a journal where he wrote about the changing seasons, the growth of his crops, and the small victories of farm life. He would sometimes talk to the animals, giving them names and imagining they understood him. There was a rhythm to his life, a sense of order and predictability that brought comfort. He found joy in small things, the first bloom of spring flowers, the sight of a new calf taking its first steps, the taste of freshly baked bread from his oven. These simple pleasures were enough to sustain him, but they could not completely fill the quiet spaces in his heart. As years went by, the farmer grew more aware of his own aging. His hair had turned gray and wrinkles had formed around his eyes. His back ached after long days of work, and he moved a little slower than he used to. Yet, he refused to let the farm go to waste. He continued to rise with the sun, to care for the land, and to maintain the routines that had kept him grounded for so many years. The farm was his life, but he longed for more than just labor and solitude. He longed for companionship, someone to share the quiet evenings with, someone to understand the joys and struggles of a life spent in close partnership with the land. Despite the passing years, the farmer remained hopeful in his own quiet way. He did not talk about it much, not even to himself, but he dreamed of a life where he might find a friend, a partner, or perhaps someone who could bring laughter and conversation into his home. He imagined the simple joys of sharing a meal, telling stories by the fire, and waking up to the sight of a familiar face. These thoughts were like fragile seeds in his heart, growing slowly and quietly, nurtured by hope and patience. The town nearby was small, and the people who lived there often wondered about the solitary man on the farm. Some thought he was content in his solitude, while others felt sorry for him, imagining a life spent entirely alone. The farmer rarely went into town, except to sell his produce or buy supplies. He preferred the quiet of his farm, the familiar smells of soil and animals, and the sounds of nature that surrounded him. Yet he could not ignore the whispers of the townfolk when they spoke of strange happenings or unusual visitors in the area. His curiosity, though tempered by caution, was sometimes piqued by these stories. One evening, as the farmer sat on his porch watching the sunset, he felt a deep longing he could not ignore. The sky was ablaze with color, the air was crisp and clean, and the fields stretched endlessly before him. He thought about the years he had spent alone, about the routines that had filled his days, and about the quiet companionship he had never known. There was a gentle ache in his heart, a desire for connection that could not be sated by the land alone. He realized that while the farm had given him purpose and a sense of accomplishment, it had not given him the warmth of human presence, the joy of shared laughter, or the comfort of understanding eyes. He recalled stories from his childhood, tales of families working together, of neighbors helping one another, and of the bonds that could form between people who shared their lives. These memories were distant and bittersweet, reminders of a world he had never fully experienced. The thought of finding someone to share his life with seemed both impossible and irresistible. He had become accustomed to his solitude, yet the idea of companionship now felt like a light breaking through the long shadow of years spent alone. In the following days, the farmer began to notice things he had not paid attention to before. The way the wind whispered through the trees, the songs of birds returning in the morning, and the subtle changes in the seasons all seemed to speak to him of the passing of time and the value of human connection. He worked with renewed energy, tending to the farm with care, but his mind often wandered to thoughts of what it might be like to have someone by his side. He imagined conversations, shared meals, and quiet evenings by the fire, and he felt a deep yearning for a life that included more than just himself. Though he had no immediate plans, the farmer began to listen more closely to the world around him. He paid attention to stories from the town, to travelers passing by, and to the whispers of nature. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something unexpected might enter his life and change it forever. He did not know when or how it would happen, but the farmer held onto a quiet hope that his years of solitude might finally come to an end. And so, the farmer continued his life, balancing the comfort of routine with the quiet longing in his heart. Each day was filled with the familiar tasks of farm life, yet each evening brought the same reflection: a wish for companionship, a desire for connection, and a hope that perhaps someday his life would be shared with someone who could understand him, challenge him, and bring new meaning to the long years he had spent alone. The solitude had shaped him, taught him resilience, and given him a deep appreciation for life's small pleasures. Yet now more than ever, he was ready for a change, ready for a presence that could transform his quiet farm into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and shared life. The farmer's story was one of patience, resilience, and quiet hope. He had spent years tending the land, nurturing life in its many forms, and enduring the stillness of his home. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a spark of longing remained, a longing for connection, understanding, and the companionship that had eluded him for so long. It was a longing that would shape the rest of his life, leading him toward an unexpected encounter that would change his solitary world forever. News traveled slowly through the small town near the farmer's land, carried by neighbors, travelers, and the occasional merchant who passed through. People whispered about a woman, an Apache woman, who was said to be the last of her people. Her story was unusual, and the mystery surrounding her had captured the imagination of everyone in the area. Some said she had been left behind when her tribe moved away. Others claimed she had chosen a life apart from the world. Whatever the truth, she was known for her strength, her courage, and the way she had survived alone in the wilderness for years. The townspeople spoke in hushed tones whenever her name came up, treating it with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. They told tales of her skill with nature, how she could find water where none seemed to exist, track animals, and live off the land in ways that amazed even seasoned farmers. Children were warned to respect her, and adults speculated about the kind of person she might be. Some wondered how someone could endure years of isolation and still maintain hope, while others marveled at the idea that she had managed to preserve the traditions of her people, living with dignity and strength despite being left alone. The farmer, hearing these stories, felt a strange mix of emotions. At first, he was skeptical, unsure if the tales were true or exaggerated. But as the stories repeated themselves, he began to feel a sense of curiosity he had not experienced in years. The thought of meeting someone so extraordinary stirred something deep within him, a desire not just to see her, but to understand her, to witness the life she had led, and perhaps to find a connection that he had longed for but never believed he would find. For days, he could not stop thinking about her. He imagined what it might be like to meet the last Apache woman, to hear her speak, to learn from her, and to share in even a small part of her world. The idea of a life interrupted by loneliness resonated with him, and he felt an unexpected empathy for someone who had endured solitude as he had. He began to see parallels between their lives, both shaped by isolation, both dependent on the land, and both resilient in the face of hardship. One afternoon, he decided to visit the town and ask questions. He spoke quietly with a few merchants and townspeople who had seen her or knew her story. Some were hesitant, warning him not to interfere, to respect her independence. Others were more practical, suggesting ways he might meet her, explaining that she lived in a small cabin on the edge of the woods, surviving on what she could gather or hunt. They told him that she valued her privacy, that she had little trust in strangers, and that any attempt to meet her would need to be approached with care and respect. The farmer listened to every word, his interest growing. He knew that approaching her carelessly could be a mistake. She was not someone to be bargained with or persuaded easily. Her life had been one of independence, shaped by necessity and a deep connection to nature. The thought of intruding on her life made him pause, but he also recognized that he could offer something she might not have had in years: companionship, understanding, and perhaps a place of safety and comfort if she chose to accept it. For several days, the farmer prepared himself. He thought carefully about what he might say, how he would approach her, and how he could show respect for her life and her choices. He gathered gifts from his farm, not as payment but as a gesture of goodwill: fresh fruits, vegetables, homemade bread, and a few small items that might be useful in her daily life. He understood that these offerings could not replace the independence she had fought so hard to maintain, but he hoped they would show his intentions were honest. Finally, one morning, he set out on the journey to her cabin. The path led through a narrow forest trail, with branches brushing against his shoulders and the sun filtering through the leaves. Birds sang in the trees, and the sound of a nearby stream provided a gentle background to his thoughts. He walked slowly, aware of the weight of the moment. Each step brought him closer to meeting someone who had lived in a world very different from his own, someone whose life had been shaped by history, culture, and survival. When he arrived, he paused at the edge of a clearing, catching his first glimpse of her cabin. It was small, made of wood and stone, blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Smoke rose from a chimney, and the faint smell of cooking filled the air. He took a deep breath, reminded himself of the stories he had heard, and stepped forward carefully. He called out softly, introducing himself and explaining that he had come in peace. At first, there was no response. He waited patiently, listening to the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, and the distant cry of an animal. Then slowly, the door of the cabin opened and she appeared. She was tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of experiences, both joyful and painful. Her expression was guarded, wary of the stranger standing before her. She studied him carefully, noting his posture, the sincerity in his eyes, and the careful way he carried himself. The first moments were quiet, filled with an unspoken understanding that trust would need to be earned. The farmer introduced himself again, explaining that he had lived alone for many years and understood the challenges of solitude. He offered a small gift, a basket of fresh bread and vegetables. She looked at him silently, considering his gesture before finally accepting it. The act was small, but it was a first step toward connection. Over the next hours, they began to talk. The conversation was slow and cautious at first, with her asking questions about his life and his farm, and him listening carefully as she spoke about her own experiences. She told him of the years she had spent alone, the challenges she had faced, and the ways she had survived. He listened with empathy, realizing that her strength was born not from harshness, but from resilience and courage. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the farmer realized that this encounter had already begun to change him. He had approached her with curiosity, but he left with respect and admiration for her life. She had endured what few could imagine, and yet she had maintained her dignity, her independence, and her sense of self. He felt a deep sense of humility and a growing desire to be part of her life, not to control it but to share in it, should she allow it. Before he left, they agreed on a simple understanding. He would return the next day, bringing more food and supplies, and they would continue to talk. There was no promise, no expectation, only the beginning of a tentative trust. The farmer walked back through the forest, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. He knew that this meeting could be the start of something meaningful, or it could fade into memory. But for the first time in many years, he felt a spark of excitement, a sense that life might be opening a new chapter for him, one filled with connection, learning, and the possibility of companionship. Back at his farm, the quiet seemed different that night. The stars twinkled overhead, but instead of the familiar ache of loneliness, he felt a warmth spreading in his chest. He thought about her, the way she moved, spoke, and lived, and realized that life had a way of surprising those who waited patiently. He had spent years tending his farm and enduring solitude, but now there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that perhaps the loneliness of the past could give way to a shared future. In the days that followed, the farmer continued to prepare for his visits. He gathered more food, tidied his tools, and made small improvements to his cabin in anticipation of a visitor who might one day choose to stay. Each morning, he rose with renewed purpose, feeling a connection not just to the land, but to the possibility of shared life. The townfolk watched with curiosity, some skeptical, some hopeful as news of his visit spread. But the farmer paid little attention to gossip. His focus was on the woman, on the life she had led, and on the respect he hoped to earn from her. Through patience, humility, and consistent effort, he slowly began to bridge the gap between two very different lives. She had been alone for years, shaped by the land, her culture, and her experiences, while he had lived in solitude, shaped by his farm and his routines. Yet they found common ground in their resilience, their understanding of the natural world, and their longing for connection. The farmer realized that true companionship could not be forced or rushed. It had to be earned, nurtured, and respected. As part 2 closes, the stage is set for a slow, careful unfolding of trust, an understanding between the farmer and the last Apache woman. Their meeting marks the beginning of a journey, one where patience, empathy, and shared experiences will gradually bring two solitary lives together, bridging worlds of culture, history, and human connection. The anticipation of what comes next lingers in the air, promising a story of resilience, hope, and the possibility of love born from mutual respect. The farmer returned the next morning with a quiet determination. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across his fields, and he felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Though he had spent years alone, he understood that meeting someone who had survived solitude for so long would require patience and care. He walked through the forest trail slowly, aware of every sound, every movement of the leaves and every bird's song, as if nature itself was guiding him toward this encounter. When he reached her cabin, he noticed small changes from the previous day. The smoke from the chimney was steadier, and the faint aroma of herbs filled the air. He approached carefully, calling her name softly. She appeared at the door, her eyes alert but not unkind. There was a quiet tension in the air, a mutual understanding that trust could not be forced, only earned through time and respect. She held herself with the calm confidence of someone who had survived alone for many years, yet there was a subtle curiosity in her gaze, as if she, too, was assessing the farmer. The farmer greeted her warmly, presenting another small gift, a basket of fresh fruits, eggs, and some homemade bread. He spoke gently, sharing a little about the life on his farm, the seasons, and the animals that roamed his land. She listened silently, her expression unreadable, but the way she accepted the basket showed that she recognized his intentions were honest. For a moment, words were unnecessary, replaced by the simple exchange of gestures, the act of offering and receiving, which in itself created a bridge between them. They spent the morning talking slowly, cautiously exploring each other's worlds. She shared stories of her childhood and the traditions of her people, describing the lessons she had learned from nature, survival, and community. The farmer listened with growing admiration, realizing that she had a depth of wisdom shaped by hardship, observation, and resilience. In turn, he told her about the farm, about tending the land, caring for animals, and the small routines that structured his life. Though their lives had been very different, they began to notice the similarities. Both had endured solitude, both understood the value of hard work, and both had developed a deep respect for the land. As the hours passed, she began to reveal more about herself, showing a softer side that few had seen. She spoke of her fears, her memories of her people, and the loneliness she had faced after being left behind. The farmer responded with empathy, sharing his own experiences of living alone, the quiet ache of missing human connection, and the ways he had learned to find comfort in routine and nature. There was a sense of understanding growing between them, a recognition that they could relate to each other in ways that others could not. By midday, the farmer offered to help with some of her daily chores, asking if she would allow him to carry water or tend to small repairs around the cabin. She hesitated at first, unused to accepting help, but she eventually agreed. Together, they worked side by side, tending to the small garden, stacking firewood, and repairing a section of the cabin roof. Their actions spoke more than words ever could, creating a rhythm of cooperation and mutual respect. The farmer realized that these small acts of shared labor were not just about practicality. They were building trust, creating a foundation for a deeper relationship. During a break, they sat on a fallen log, sharing simple food and water, and watched as the sunlight filtered through the trees. The farmer noticed the way she observed nature with careful attention, how she recognized the songs of birds and the movement of animals. He asked questions, genuinely curious, and she answered, teaching him things he had never noticed despite a lifetime on the land. There was a sense of learning and discovery between them, a quiet joy in understanding one another's perspective. The farmer felt a growing admiration for her intelligence, resilience, and the way she had maintained her independence while living in such isolation. Over the next few days, the farmer continued his visits. Each meeting was carefully paced, allowing trust to grow naturally. They spoke of hopes, dreams, and fears. The farmer shared memories of his youth, of family he had lost, and of the challenges of running a farm alone. She spoke of her people, the traditions that had been passed down, and the ways she had adapted to survive. Slowly, the barriers between them began to dissolve, replaced by mutual respect, understanding, and a tentative sense of companionship. The farmer also learned about her daily life, the routines she had developed to survive and thrive in the wilderness. She taught him how to gather herbs, how to track animals, and how to live in harmony with the land in ways he had never considered. He, in turn, shared practical farming skills, teaching her how to care for animals and plant crops more efficiently. The exchange of knowledge became a symbol of their growing connection, a way of showing care and building a shared life even before she formally became part of his world. One evening, as they sat by a small fire outside her cabin, the conversation turned to the future. The farmer spoke of his farm, the land he had tended for decades, and the loneliness that had always been a part of his life. He asked if she would consider visiting his farm more often, perhaps even staying for longer periods. She was cautious, reminding him that independence was essential to her and that trust could not be rushed. Yet she did not dismiss the idea entirely. Instead, she acknowledged that she was curious about his life, the farm, and the possibility of companionship that did not demand submission but offered partnership. The farmer felt a quiet hope rising within him. He understood that her independence was not a barrier to connection, but a testament to her strength. He respected her choices and promised that any future together would be built on equality, trust, and mutual respect. The conversation ended with a simple agreement. He would return the next day, not with demands or expectations, but with an open heart and patience, allowing the relationship to develop at its own pace. Over the following week, the farmer's visits became a regular part of his routine. Each trip strengthened their bond, creating moments of shared laughter, learning, and quiet reflection. They worked together, cooked together, and began to share small personal details about their lives. The farmer learned to understand her moods, her subtle expressions, and the rhythms of her daily life. She, in turn, learned to trust him, recognizing that his intentions were genuine and that he valued her independence and wisdom. As the connection deepened, the farmer reflected on how unusual this relationship was. They came from completely different worlds, shaped by vastly different experiences, yet they had found common ground in resilience, respect for nature, and the desire for human connection. Each encounter reinforced the idea that companionship did not require similarity, but understanding, patience, and empathy. The farmer marveled at the way trust could be nurtured slowly, how small acts of care and consistent respect could bridge the gap between two solitary lives. One morning, after a particularly long conversation about their pasts and hopes for the future, the farmer realized that he had come to value her presence in a way he had not anticipated. Her wisdom, courage, and perspective on life had opened his eyes to new possibilities. He began to imagine what life might be like if she were to join him on his farm, not as someone to be owned or controlled, but as a partner, a companion, and an equal. The thought filled him with both excitement and a deep sense of responsibility. By the end of part 3, the foundation of their relationship had been firmly established. Trust had been nurtured through shared work, careful conversation, and mutual respect. Both the farmer and the Apache woman had begun to see the potential for a life together, one built not on necessity or obligation, but on understanding, patience, and the quiet joy of companionship. The story of the farmer and the last Apache woman was no longer just about two solitary lives intersecting. It was about the slow, careful unfolding of a bond that could transform both of their worlds, offering hope, learning, and the possibility of a shared future filled with warmth, respect, and human connection. The farmer's farm had always been a quiet place, filled with the soft sounds of animals, the rustling of leaves, and the gentle movement of crops swaying in the wind. Yet from the moment the Apache woman began spending more time there, the farm took on a new life. The mornings, once marked only by his routine, now began with laughter, conversation, and a sense of shared purpose. Together they rose with the sun, tending to the animals, checking the fields, and planning the day's work. There was a rhythm to their actions, a cooperation that was both practical and deeply satisfying. At first, the adjustments were small. She helped with chores around the farm, fetching water, gathering eggs, and feeding the animals. He, in turn, taught her how to plant certain crops, mend fences, and manage the barn. Every task became an opportunity to learn from one another, blending their experiences into a shared understanding of life on the land. The farmer marveled at her skills, noting how her knowledge of nature and survival complemented his practical experience. It was as if their separate worlds had merged, creating a life richer than either had imagined. Beyond the work, there were moments of connection that could not be planned. They shared meals prepared together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation. She taught him how to cook with herbs and wild plants, showing him ways to bring flavor and nutrition from the land itself. He showed her how to bake bread and preserve fruits, explaining techniques passed down through generations. These shared experiences were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning. They were learning from each other, not just skills, but ways of seeing the world. As they spent more time together, they began to share stories of their pasts. The farmer spoke of the long years of solitude, of the quiet ache of missing companionship, and the challenges of maintaining a farm alone. She listened carefully, sometimes nodding, sometimes sharing a memory of her own. She spoke of her tribe, the traditions she had grown up with, and the lessons learned from living close to nature. They discovered that despite the differences in their lives, there was a common thread of resilience, patience, and respect for the natural world. There were also challenges. At times, their different habits and perspectives led to misunderstandings. She valued silence and reflection, while he was used to talking through thoughts and plans. She had rituals and routines from her past, while he had traditions shaped by farm life. Yet, instead of letting these differences drive them apart, they used them as opportunities to learn about one another. The farmer learned to appreciate moments of quiet, seeing them as a form of strength rather than emptiness. She learned to enjoy shared conversation, discovering that expressing thoughts aloud could bring new understanding. One of the most rewarding aspects of their growing life together was the cultural exchange. She taught him about the traditions of the Apache, the significance of plants, the stories of the land, and the ways her people honored nature. The farmer listened with fascination, absorbing knowledge that had been preserved for generations. He began to see his own land through her eyes, noticing patterns, rhythms, and signs that he had overlooked. The farm became a place of learning, not just labor, and he felt his respect for the natural world deepen. In turn, the farmer shared his own knowledge of farming, animal care, and daily routines. He showed her how to plow fields efficiently, how to mend tools, and how to plan for changing seasons. She was quick to learn, her hands skilled and precise, but he also appreciated her insights and suggestions. Together, they made improvements to the farm, combining their knowledge to create a more productive and harmonious environment. Their cooperation strengthened the bond between them, turning practical tasks into opportunities for partnership and trust. Their evenings were often spent by the fire, talking, laughing, and sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. They would watch the stars appear in the sky, feeling a sense of peace that neither had experienced alone. The farmer began to realize that the companionship he had longed for was not about constant conversation or activity, but about sharing presence, understanding, and mutual respect. She, too, began to see the value in having someone to share her life with, someone who honored her independence while offering support and care. One afternoon, While working in the orchard, they discovered a small, injured bird among the trees. She carefully tended to it, showing the farmer how to clean the wound and provide food. Together, they watched as the bird regained strength and eventually flew away. The simple act of caring for another living being became symbolic of their growing relationship. They were learning to nurture life together, to be patient, gentle, and attentive. It was a lesson that extended beyond the farm, teaching them about empathy, responsibility, and the quiet joys of shared care. There were also moments of reflection and planning for the future. The farmer and the Apache woman discussed what life could look like if they continued together. They spoke of improvements to the farm, ways to preserve the land, and how to honor both their traditions. They considered the possibility of creating a home that reflected both their histories and values. These discussions were approached with care, ensuring that each felt heard and respected. It was clear that any future together would be built on equality, not obligation, a partnership formed through understanding rather than necessity. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Small gestures became meaningful: a shared meal, a kind word, a helping hand. The farmer noticed how her presence brought warmth and light into the farm, filling spaces that had been empty for decades. She began to enjoy the security and comfort the farm offered, appreciating that her independence was not threatened but supported. They celebrated small victories together, whether it was a successful harvest, a repaired tool, or a new skill learned. Each moment reinforced the trust and respect that were the foundation of their relationship. The farmer also began to notice changes in himself. He felt a renewed energy for life, a sense of purpose beyond tending the land. He looked forward to their conversations, valued her insights, and learned to see the world from different perspectives. The solitude that had once defined his life was slowly replaced by connection, understanding, and the quiet joy of companionship. He realized that the farm was not just a place of work, but a home where two lives could grow together, rooted in care, respect, and shared experience. As the seasons changed, so did their routines. Spring brought planting, summer brought tending the fields, and autumn brought harvest. Throughout these cycles, their relationship deepened. They learned to communicate without words at times, understanding each other through gestures, glances, and shared effort. The farm became a place of learning, love, and mutual growth, where both found fulfillment in work and companionship. They were no longer two solitary lives existing side by side, but a partnership in which each enriched the other's experience of life. In the quiet moments of the day, when work was done and the sun was low in the sky, they would sit together, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. They spoke of the past, the hardships they had endured, and the lessons they had learned. They acknowledged the loneliness that had once defined them, but also celebrated the connection they had built. It was a bond forged through patience, respect, and shared experiences, a bond that neither could have anticipated but both had come to cherish. By the end of Part 4, the farmer and the Apache woman had established a rhythm of life together. The farm was alive with activity, learning, and companionship. They had learned from each other, supported one another, and created a space where independence and partnership could coexist. Their story was no longer just about survival or solitude. It was about building a life together, blending traditions, skills, and experiences into a shared journey. The foundation of trust and respect they had laid promised a future filled with warmth, understanding, and the quiet joys of shared life, setting the stage for the final chapter of their story. As time passed, the farmer and the Apache woman had become inseparable parts of each other's lives. The farm, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft rhythms of daily life shared between two people who had found each other after years of solitude. Each day began with the rising sun, a gentle reminder that life continued, bringing opportunities for work, learning, and companionship. Their mornings were busy but joyful, as they tended to the animals, inspected the crops, and planned their tasks for the day. Over the months, the Apache woman had grown deeply connected to the farm. She had adapted her knowledge of nature and survival to the routines of farm life, creating a balance between her traditional ways and the practical needs of the land. She built small gardens for herbs and wild plants, combining her understanding of native flora with the crops the farmer had been cultivating for years. The two worked seamlessly together, their actions coordinated without the need for constant words. They had developed a rhythm, a silent communication born from trust and familiarity that made their shared life feel natural and harmonious. Beyond the work, their bond had deepened emotionally. They celebrated small victories together, a harvest that exceeded expectations, a new animal born on the farm, or a repaired fence that had withstood storms. They also supported each other during challenges, harsh weather, unexpected animal illness, or days when the work seemed overwhelming. Each obstacle became an opportunity to show care, patience, and understanding. The farmer realized that the presence of the Apache woman had brought not only companionship, but also a sense of resilience and strength to their shared life, and he felt gratitude for the wisdom and courage she contributed every day. They shared stories late into the evenings by the fire. The Apache woman recounted legends from her tribe, explaining their meaning, the lessons they carried, and the ways they connected to the land and its cycles. The farmer shared his own experiences, recounting the challenges and joys of running a farm alone, and the lessons he had learned through decades of perseverance. Through these conversations, they built a deep respect for each other's pasts, understanding that their experiences had shaped who they were, and that together, they could build a future enriched by both their histories. As the seasons turned, their relationship grew stronger. Spring brought the planting of new crops, summer offered the vibrant growth of the fields, autumn provided bountiful harvests, and winter gave moments of quiet reflection beside the fire. Each season was experienced together, creating a shared history that neither could imagine living without. The Apache woman taught the farmer about seasonal indicators, the movement of animals, and the subtle changes in the wind and sky that signaled weather shifts. He, in turn, showed her techniques for preserving food, caring for animals in winter, and maintaining the farm efficiently through the cold months. Their cooperation became a source of pride and joy, not just for themselves, but for the land that thrived under their care. The farmer noticed changes in himself as well. His long years of solitude had given him strength and patience, but the presence of the Apache woman had brought new vitality to his life. He felt lighter, more hopeful, and more engaged with the world around him. He laughed more freely, spoke with warmth and openness, and found joy in small moments that had once gone unnoticed. Her presence reminded him of the value of human connection, of shared effort, and of companionship built on equality, respect, and love. One day, while sitting beneath the large oak tree that had stood on the farm for decades, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The farmer spoke of the emptiness he had felt for years, the quiet ache of missing companionship, and the hope that had led him to seek her out. The Apache woman shared her own experiences of solitude, the lessons learned from living independently, and the cautious optimism she had felt as their relationship grew. They acknowledged the challenges they had faced, the patience required, and the mutual respect that had allowed their bond to flourish. Together, they also planned for the future. They discussed ways to preserve the farm, to maintain the balance between traditional practices and modern methods, and to continue learning from one another. The Apache woman expressed her desire to honor the traditions of her people, while also embracing the life they were building together. The farmer promised to support her independence, valuing her wisdom, and acknowledging the unique perspective she brought to their shared life. These conversations strengthened their partnership, reinforcing the understanding that their relationship was built on equality and mutual respect. Neighbors and townspeople gradually noticed the transformation. The once quiet farm now seemed alive, not just with the sounds of animals and nature, but with the energy of a shared life. People spoke of the harmony and productivity of the farm, marveling at the way the farmer and the Apache woman worked together. Some were curious, others inspired, but all recognized that this partnership was unusual and remarkable. The farmer, once seen as a solitary figure, was now part of a story of companionship, respect, and resilience that touched those around him. Their life together also inspired small acts of generosity and care for others. The farmer and the Apache woman occasionally welcomed visitors, sharing knowledge about farming, survival, and nature. They offered guidance to younger people in the community, teaching lessons about patience, respect, and cooperation. The farm became more than a place of work. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when two people came together with understanding and care. It was a living example of how companionship could transform lives, bringing warmth, hope, and growth. Despite the joy and companionship, they never lost sight of the importance of independence. The Apache woman continued to honor her traditions and personal routines, and the farmer respected her need for space and reflection. They understood that true partnership did not require constant togetherness, but the freedom to maintain individual identity while sharing life in meaningful ways. This balance became one of the pillars of their relationship, a reminder that love and respect flourish when independence is honored alongside connection. As years passed, the farm thrived under their joint care. Crops were abundant, animals healthy, and the land nurtured with diligence and love. The farmer's hands, once roughened solely by labor, now carried the warmth of shared effort. The Apache woman's knowledge of nature and survival enriched every aspect of their life, from planting crops to predicting weather changes. Their home became a place of stability, comfort, and joy, reflecting the harmony they had created together. The quiet evenings by the fire became moments of reflection and gratitude. They would look at the stars, remembering the paths that had brought them together. Each star seemed to represent a step in their journey: the farmer's patience, the woman's courage, the trust that had grown between them, and the love that had quietly blossomed. These moments reminded them that life was most meaningful when shared, and that the bond they had built was a testament to resilience, understanding, and hope. In time, they also began to think about legacy. They discussed how to preserve the land, pass on knowledge, and honor the lessons of their lives. The Apache woman spoke of her people, her traditions, and the importance of remembering history. The farmer reflected on his years alone, the solitude that had shaped him, and the joy he had found in companionship. Together, they envisioned a future where the land, their experiences, and the wisdom they had gathered would continue to have meaning, inspiring those who came after them. Their companionship became a source of fulfillment neither had imagined. The farmer, who had once thought solitude would define his life forever, now found joy in shared mornings, collaborative work, and quiet evenings. The Apache woman, who had survived years of isolation, discovered trust, comfort, and connection. They had built a life together that balanced independence and partnership, strength and vulnerability, work and reflection. Their story was not just about survival, it was about finding meaning, connection, and love in unexpected ways. By the end of Part 5, the farmer and the Apache woman had transformed their lives completely. The farm was no longer a place of solitude, but a home filled with warmth, laughter, and shared purpose. They had learned from one another, respected each other's histories, and created a partnership based on trust, equality, and care. Their journey demonstrated that even the loneliest lives can be transformed by understanding, patience, and the courage to embrace companionship. The story closed not with an ending, but with a promise. A life enriched by shared effort, mutual respect, and the quiet, enduring joy of walking together through each season of life.